Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël.
Donald Trump is attacking the media as the enemy of the people. But what is so striking is, if you just look at our show this morning, I mean, Mika's a journalist. Ruth, who we're about to introduce, is a journalist. But we ain't the media. It's a bunch of Republicans who have spent their entire life fighting conservative causes, for Republican presidents, for conservative movements. We got you, we got Rick Wilson, we had Peggy Noonan, we had Tom Nichols, one Republican after another Republican who is not a journalist, who provides comment, and who is absolutely shocked and dumbfounded by what this man is not only doing to the Republican Party and the conservative movement, but for the United States of America. Talk about the derangement of the American mind, because I must say, I'm kind of tired of talking about Donald Trump. I want to talk about the 45% of Americans who actually like what he's doing by stirring up hatred.
You know, that's exactly right. You know, it's like we can't be shocked by Donald Trump because we know who he is. I mean, we know what is in his DNA. But the way people react, and Tom Nichols mentioned this a little bit before, you know, to turn the lens to those crowds, you know, after this horrific shooting, this tragedy, they're, you know, talking CNN sucks, chanting, you know, that lock her up. And that's what's happened, is the moral test to the Republican Party that they have failed over and over and over again. This is a man who, the president, has been a man who has stoked our divisions, has stoked the fear and the hostility, has created this toxic stew. And we're being reminded the number of people out there who take him both literally and seriously. So at one level, you have people who are willing to rationalize and defend his behavior, but also you actually have the folks out there, the haters, who draw oxygen from what this president has done, from the whistles that he has sent. And that's what makes this such a dangerous time. And the fact is, the president of the United States is the arsonist in chief.
Rick Wilson, I am naive. I will be the first to admit I am naive. I never believed what liberals said about us all along. I never believed that there was this undercurrent in the Republican Party of racism, of nativism, of anti-Semitism. I didn't believe it. You didn't believe it. Charlie Sykes didn't believe it. Tom Nichols didn't believe it. And we spent our entire lives telling people it wasn't true. I'll be damned. I'm 55 years old. Bingo. They had us exactly right. They had the party exactly right. What are we to do now?
Joe, I mean, this is emblematic of the entire problem of the Republican Party being bought out by Trumpism. It revealed a segment of our demographic, a part of our party that we wanted to pretend was in the closet. We kept them in the basement and hosed them off once a year for Election Day. And unfortunately, we now have to face the fact that that element feels empowered and emboldened. And they read tweets like today, which, you know, I'm sure that tweet sounded better in the original German, but they read tweets like today, and they're not taking it as some sort of joke joking, Trumpism. They take it as marching orders. And maybe it's only a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction, but it only takes a tiny fraction to have a guy walk into a synagogue and kill 11 people. It only takes a tiny fraction to have a guy send 14 bombs out to Democratic political leaders and former presidents. These people are hearing this. It's not a dog whistle. It's an air raid siren.
But Rick, the problem is 90% of Republicans supporting. You have people chanting in the crowds. I would have never, ever, ever, over 5 decades predicted this would happen after people were targets of bombs. That you actually have the President of the United States still attacking those people, and people in the crowd more disturbingly chanting attacks at CNN and also chanting attacks at Hillary Clinton. Good God, where were they raised? Because they weren't raised in my neighborhood.
Oh, they were raised in part in the post-2010 era, Joe. This whole separate media silo that built up that repeated over and over again conspiracy theories and stoked this sense of inferiority and anger every single day. And those folks now have an avatar in Donald
Rick,
Trump.
So thank you for saying that, Rick. I got to ask you, the inferiority complex, the victim complex. I'm a victim. Hollywood doesn't like me. The media doesn't like me. But oh wait, hold on.
Right.
I own the Supreme Court. I own the United States House of Representatives. I own the United States Senate. I own the United States presidency. I own the Justice Department of the United States of America. I own the DHS. I own everything, but I'm still a little snowflake who gets their feelings hurt when Hollywood does a movie I don't like. Please explain that to me. They own the world and they're still victims?
Joe, that's the classic trope of all these authoritarians. There's always a conspiracy. There's always the they in brackets going after them. These guys, this is a sign of how fundamentally weak Donald Trump is. The guy is a quivering blob of man-baby goo. He's just a child, and he acts like this stompy-footed little tantrum-throwing infant all the time because he knows his base loves that sense of alienation. They love being reminded that certain people can read and they don't read so good, and they love that sense of somebody who's going to be their champion and stoke their anger and tell them all their resentments are justified. And that's part of what you and I fought against, and Charlie fought against, and Peggy fought against for so long, is the acknowledgement there are people who want to have their resentments stoked and their fears stoked, and a lot of those things were down to racial questions. And Donald Trump is an arsonist, as Charlie said, on race, on the media, on a whole spectrum of areas that we have to acknowledge. Unique social media power makes that arson incredibly dangerous for this country and this republic.
It is Tuesday, the 30th of October of 2018, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. That's right, folks, just a smidgen of Hungarian or Spanish hot smoked paprika will make all the difference. Indeed. Well. The logic doesn't have to be logical when coming from the mouth of Donald Trump. The 14th Amendment can just be executive ordered out of existence, apparently. Who told him that? He said that he spoke with some people about the law, and they told him, oh yeah, 14th Amendment, we don't need no stinking 14th Amendment. I suspect it was the Mar-a-Lago square table. You had the Algonquin round table. Well, you got a bunch of squares who just happen to have a bunch of money. And they sit at the square table because they're a bunch of squares. And they dispense with their vaunted wisdom. And I gotta tell you, in my experience, just because people have money doesn't mean that they are terribly, shall we say, enlightened. It does not follow that once one acquires money, that they are then bestowed with, the enlightened despot. They're just despots. There's nothing enlightened about them. That usually occurs before they acquire the money, Or if they were born into it, their parents, I don't know, kept them from the money until they learned at least some noblesse oblige. Which is, I got to tell you, a little patriarchal in and of itself, too. I mean, if we want to be clear. I've been hearing this argument that, be more like Michael, less like Sonny. How about we just follow the effing law? I don't know. Call me a Boy Scout. Yeah, well, I was. Mm-hmm. And I would have become an Eagle Scout, but I had some other things to do, like stop the war in Vietnam. And I found out that it wasn't, you couldn't really do it within the confines of, camping out with a bunch of guys, I don't know. Yeah, with a bunch of guys. Wanting to wear uniforms, pretending that maybe they might be able to go into the jungles of Vietnam and, I don't know, camp out. Jesus. All right, so 14th Amendment is under the gun, and it isn't. This is another dodge. And this is the other thing I can't figure out. First, it was going to be like around 800 troops to the southern border, because we already have a bunch of National Guardsmen, right? And there is this little thing called the Comitatus Act, the Posse Comitatus Act. Let's get rid of that. We don't need that either. Who told them that? The Mar-a-Lago Square Table? Regardless, sending a bunch of troops to the southern border for, I don't know, a political show. This evil, terrible, scary caravan is still about 1,200 miles away. Moms with kids. Oh, and I just love the incessant trope that you hear every single time by these xenophobic, and I got to tell you, are they really xenophobic, or are they just so craven they'll use xenophobia to achieve their, I don't know, evil ends? But regardless, the caravan is now a pestilence of disease. All right. I just don't think that's so. If you want to get a pestilence of disease, try going into a conservative suburb of white people. Yeah, a whole bunch of homeschoolers. I got to tell you, you better stay away from those bugs. They're just floating around the whole neighborhood. There's no herd containment of those viruses or bacterias even. Anything. Talk about pestilence of disease that looks clean. But you put the little test strip on, you want to get out of it. You want to put on a hazmat suit. Well, at the top there, that was Joe Scarborough finally admitting, that liberals have been right about Republicans really since before Eisenhower even thought of the Interstate Highway system. And then on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, a U.S. government-run television service actually ran a segment attacking George Soros as a multimillionaire Jew. Wow. I mean, it's pretty much of a lie throughout because he's a multi-billionaire. Jeez, God, can't even get that right. But it serves their devilish ends. A U.S. citizen detained by the Trump administration without charge for over a year is finally free. And Pennsylvania's Republican gerrymander is now so dead that not even Brett Kavanaugh can revive it. Not even Brett. After the break, we then move to the chef's table, where lawyers for a man convicted in a right-wing terror plot begged the judge for leniency because he believed all of Trump's lies. And you can rest assured that the bomber and the anti-Semite massacre killer will use the same trope and defense. And they might be right. And Angela Merkel's exit from the world stage. Oh, yeah, did you hear? She's not going to lead her party anymore, and that's, see ya. Well, her exit from the world stage will polarize not only Germany, but the whole of Europe as well. maybe more towards the right of the polarization spectrum. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Just about 7 days and 12 hours remaining until November 6th, Election Day. You still have time to determine if you are registered to vote and to register to vote. And you can do that if you would simply just go to our homepage at netrootsradio.com. There are links right there. As soon as the page loads, you'll notice these beautiful scrolls, and just do that. And in many states, you are allowed to be able to register to vote right about up until the time you vote. Regardless, please do vote, and if you have some friends, take them to vote. If you're on one of those dating apps, how about setting up a date to go vote together? I can't imagine what could be more romantic in these times. Okay? So go and vote, please. Take some friends. Get them to vote too. All right. Scroll to the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. The chat room link is on the rightish of the page. Our contribute donate button is on the leftish of the page. And please do become a Patreon of Netroots Radio. And all kidding aside, your generosity helps us pay the bills. And as long as we pay the bills, we can pretty much slide under the radar. Pretty much. And as far as I know, we're not on anybody's, known hit list. It's the unknowns that are a little scary when you think about it. Okay. Follow Netroots Radio on Twitter at Netroots Radio. We are, of course, on Facebook. Do follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. And I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime, and I try to get that linked up to the social media platforms out there just to spread the word. So do spread the word. And you can also follow the show on Facebook. We're on Twitter at Cookbook West, and podcasts of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy can be had by way of Stitcher, Spreaker, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever fine podcasts can be found. Okay, first article here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Oh, did you know that it's Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays? It is. All right, Matthew Chapman of Alternet brings us this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Well, Radio Television Marti, a U.S. government-run television service that broadcasts to Cuba, wrote a segment months ago that called liberal billionaire philanthropist George Soros a multimillionaire Jew of Hungarian origin whose fortune is estimated at $8 billion, and a non-believing Jew of flexible morals. Oh, that's the worst kind, don't you know? All right. Well, that was implying that his activities threaten Latin America. Gee, I've never heard of any kind of, anti-Semitism in Latin America, have you? Passion play much? Well, now Talking Points Memo reports that the network has pulled the segment. Well, yeah. When they found out, oh, wow. Right here in the article, it says he's a billionaire, and we're calling him a millionaire to these Latin Americans because they can't wrap their heads around that amount of money. A billionaire is just maybe beyond their scope of reason. You always got to wonder how these people think, right? Josh Marshall in Talking Points memo reports here that Radio Television Marti is overseen by an Office of Cuban Broadcasting, a U.S. federal government office meant to, quote, promote freedom and democracy by providing the people of Cuba with objective news and information programming. Wow, maybe Networks Radio can get one of those contracts. That's what we do. And, I should add, get more and better Democrats elected to office. That's the other prime directive. All right. The segment, painting Soros as a menace to Latin America, was initially flagged by the Cuban Triangle blog and the director of the Office of Cuba Broadcasting, Tomas P. Regalado. And then he told Mother Jones that the videos were removed from the broadcaster's website when the news organization approached them about the content. The source material for the segment was from Judicial Watch. Oh, really? They used to be known as the Judicial Crisis Network, but now they're the Judicial Watch. A right-wing oversight group that is best known for filing Freedom of Information Act requests to try and find misconduct by Democratic politicians. Really? You mean frivolous lawsuits, maybe? Judicial Watch has recently gotten into trouble over its conspiracy theories about Soros. Just on Sunday, Fox News blacklisted JW Research Director Chris Farrell after he claimed on Lou Dobbs' show that the State Department is Soros-occupied. Oh, I hold in my hand a bunch of secret Jews. In fact, they're microscopic. Millions of microscopic Jews in the State Department. Well, they let that guy go. But they're keeping Lou Dobbs, which makes you wonder. And that they said that Soros is indirectly paying the Honduran migrant caravan to travel to the U.S. You know the film that they have showing somebody handing out money to, some Hispanic guy handing out money to a big crowd of people like along a street or boulevard? You've probably seen that. You know what that is? They're saying that is George Soros money being handed out to the caravan. It's a market bazaar, and those are merchants handing out chits in which people can, buy a complimentary item in which then will entice them to buy something else with real money. And it wasn't even in Honduras. It wasn't in the caravan. I think it was Venezuela. Which is, pretty bad in and of itself when you hear about Venezuela from this crowd. But, come on. You know what it does. It tickles the lizard brain, xenophobia, racism, bigotry of the people that they're trying to tickle. And it works pretty good. They go and will make maybe 100 bombs and, kill more Jews in a one-time attack on a synagogue in the history of America. Wow. That hasn't happened under any other president. I bet Trump's proud now. No other president has had that happen. Well, Regalado defended Judicial Watch after admitting it's a little skewed to the right. Judicial Watch is a good source, but having said that, it should not have been the only source, he said. The two-part series was not precise and did not have on-the-record sources to balance the story. Really? Feature? Not a bug? To be fair, and to show that we in the new administration are committed to journalistic integrity, wink, wink, the stories have been pulled out of the digital page, wink, wink, not because we want to hide anything, wink, 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 but because we want to be transparent. If we say that the story did not have the required balance, then it should not be on the air. Can you stop asking me about this now? It's gone. Sorry. We're going to keep asking, why is it gone now? Stephen Heffitz, senior staff attorney for the ACLU and writing at the Center for Democracy, brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. An American illegally detained in Iraq by the U.S. military for more than a year has finally won his freedom. On Sunday, after a long court battle, the Trump administration let our client go. Under a settlement agreement, he was released in a third country where he will once again be a free man. Parts of the agreement are confidential, and he is officially remaining unidentified for his safety and privacy, and probably for good reason, too, because, there might be some lone wolf out there wanting to do the good work. Well, the work they think is good. From the moment the American was imprisoned, his own government tried to deny him his constitutional rights. He kept his detention secret, denied his request for a lawyer, and attempted to forcibly transfer him to a dangerous war zone. Fortunately, the courts fulfilled their role and upheld his due process rights. What the Trump administration tried to do was unprecedented, and a series of historic court rulings forced the government to respect the Constitution at virtually every turn. The end result? Unwilling to justify our client's detention to a court, the government had few choices but to set him free. In September of 2017, the American was fleeing violence in Syria, where he had traveled to research and document the ongoing conflict there. He was seized by Kurdish forces, handed over to the U.S. military, and the Trump administration labeled him an enemy combatant and held him without charges. A journalist, an academic researcher. Okay. Now, his story might have ended there, with him secretly detained indefinitely, if not for the reporting of the Daily Beast, which revealed his existence to the public. Now, Sunday's release comes after months of continued litigation, as we demanded that the government either charge or release our client. In response, the government claimed the power to imprison him indefinitely without charge, accusing him of being an ISIS fighter. Our client not only contested the allegations, but also maintained that the government had to prove its allegations in a trial if it wanted to continue holding him. Instead of doing so, the government sought to transfer the American to the custody of a foreign country over his objection. In fact, the government said that it could spirit him away in the dead of night without informing the judge or his lawyers beforehand, but the district court rejected this assertion of unfettered government power over an American's right and blocked the government's proposed transfer. Now, this case illustrates the critical role that the press plays as a check against government abuse of power. Without the original revelation by journalists about this American's incommunicado and illegal detention, he might never have gotten his day in court at all. The vitality of our Constitution depends on the determination of judges to protect individuals against government overreach. This should be the last time any administration attempts to deny an American's basic rights, except when you decide, executive order, goodbye 14th Amendment, because I think I can. Go a little bit into our break, finishing up with this last offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. I'm not only the chef de cuisine of this salon, but I'm also a poet, philosopher, king. I'm a temporarily embarrassed poet, philosopher, king. Given time, I will rise again. Ian Millhiser brings us this offering here out of Think Progress. Every now and then democracy wins. Because yesterday, the Supreme Court turned away an effort to reinstate Pennsylvania's gerrymandered congressional maps. Although this is not the first time the court refused to bail out the GOP's partisan gerrymander in the state, it is the first time it turned away this case since Kavanaugh's confirmation gave Republicans a solid majority in the Supreme Court. Now, the case is Turtsai versus Brandt. Last January, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court struck down that state's congressional maps because they violated the state constitution. The unconstitutional maps were so aggressively gerrymandered that Republicans won 13 of the state's 18 congressional districts in 2012, even though the Democrats won the majority of the popular vote. Of course, Republicans will say, "What's wrong with that? It's how we fixed it. There's no other way we can win. How is that fair? If you take away our ability to cheat, how is that fair?" The state Supreme Court's decision should have been the final word on the case. As a general rule, state Supreme Courts have the final word on questions of state law, and the Supreme Court of the United States cannot overrule their interpretation of a state constitution. Nevertheless, Pennsylvania Republicans. We won't put the onus on the great Ian Millhiser with adding the G, as I would. They came to the U.S. Supreme Court with a legal theory that is simultaneously outlandish but nevertheless well-crafted to appeal to Republican judges. You mean Federalist Society Republican judges? The Constitution provides that the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. Pennsylvania Republicans argue that this language prevents the state Supreme Court from tossing out a partisan gerrymander because a court is not a legislature. Now, the Supreme Court, however, has repeatedly rejected this reading of the word legislature. It did so most recently in 2015 in the decision in Arizona State Legislature versus Arizona Independent Redistrict Commission. More than a century ago, the Supreme Court held that the redistricting can be determined by a referendum. Not long thereafter, the Supreme Court held that the governor may veto state redistricting legislation even though the governor is not a member of the state's legislative branch. Taken together, these cases established that when the Constitution assigns the power to draw districts to the legislature, it refers to the state's valid lawmaking process, not necessarily to the body of lawmakers elected by the people. Nevertheless, Arizona State Legislature was a 5-4 decision, with 4 Republicans arguing that the word legislature can only refer to a state's legislative branch. Now, the court's 5th Republican, Anthony Kennedy, he got bought off. And then they didn't even pay him what he was supposed to get bought off for. He was really pissed at Trump about that. And they have a video that shows the argument, too. Well, Kennedy's, of course, no longer on the court. And who took his place? Yeah, Brett Kavanaugh, who's even a more hardline conservative than Fat Tony. And he appeared to call for revenge against Democrats during his confirmation hearing. At the very least, however, Kavanaugh will not be able to take his revenge in this particular case. The court's decision not to hear Turtsai suggests that, at the very least, Republicans don't have the votes to reinstate one of the nation's most egregious gerrymanders. And once again, democracy wins. Not very often, but when it does, it is sweet. Okay, let's get to our delayed break. And when we come back, we will go through weather from around the world and finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, A new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata. The oceans are getting louder, and coastal areas are some of the noisiest, as in this underwater recording captured 17 miles off the coast of Ocean City, Maryland. The noise could be a problem for marine mammals, which, like us, use sound to communicate.
Just like if we're in a noisy bar, we have to shout to each other, they might have to do that too.
Helen Bailey is a marine biologist at the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. She and her colleagues recorded 2 months of underwater sounds in that same area off the coast of Maryland. They used automated software to fish out 200 bottlenose dolphin whistles from the noise and visually compared the spectrograms. Now here's what a normal whistle sounds like. But what they found was that dolphins dumbed down the complexity of their whistles and raised their pitch when they were competing with shipping noise, like this, which apparently helps, but could also hurt their ability to communicate.
By using simpler calls, yes, there is a risk that they're not communicating as much information as they would if it was quieter. Also, for younger dolphins, they actually learn these sounds from hearing other dolphins. So they're hearing this much simpler language.
The results, and a few of those spectrograms, are in the journal Biology Letters. The survey site is the proposed future home of a wind farm, which could mean lots of noise as the huge towers are installed. Till then, it's the chronic roar of ships and boats that Bailey wants people to ponder.
I think people think about boats in terms of sort of the emissions, just like with cars. And I think what we need to think about is that sound is also an emission.
Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
You can help stop the Trump agenda in its tracks. Make sure you're registered to vote. Go to rockthevote.org. And on November 6th, vote for Democrats up and down the ticket. This message, a public service from all the fine people of netrootsradio.com.
Vernon Madison has been in prison, on death row, in Alabama, for 33 years. Now what? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. During those 33 years in prison, mostly in solitary confinement, Madison has suffered several strokes, and he now exhibits many symptoms of brain damage. He slurs his speech, he's disoriented, he's blind, he can't walk by himself, and he's incontinent. He also has no memory of the crime that put him on death row. But to the state of Alabama, none of this matters. Not his vascular dementia, not his cognitive deficits, not his severe memory loss, not his brain damage. Alabama still really wants to execute him. On Madison's side is his lawyer, Brian Stevenson, the renowned human rights attorney from the Equal Justice Initiative in Alabama. Stevenson argues that the Eighth Amendment prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment prohibits the execution of a person who does not remember the crime and has no understanding why he's being executed. The U.S. Supreme Court heard oral arguments on this case on October 2nd. We will soon find out if 5 Supreme Court justices will or won't vote in favor of this state-sponsored killing. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I read the news today, oh boy. It's time for Nicole Sandler's What's News from NicoleSandler.com and the Progressive Voices Network.
Buildings in Pittsburgh were illuminated in blue Monday night in tribute to the 11 people killed in the shooting attack on the Tree of Life Synagogue, called the deadliest attack against Jews in U.S. history. The first funerals for the victims being held Monday, the day after the suspect made his first court appearance. Trump and his wife visit the city Tuesday, but more than 35,000 people have signed an open letter to the president from the leaders of a Pittsburgh-based Jewish group who say the president will not be welcome in the city unless he denounces white nationalism and stops targeting minorities.
We anticipate the president is going to come here to the synagogue with the First Lady. Mr. Trump has already said he's going to the hospital to visit one of the wounded officers.
Robert Bowers was in a wheelchair during his roughly 10-minute court appearance on Monday. The 46-year-old accused shooter said very little except yes when the judge asked him if he understood the charges against him, which include federal hate crimes, that he could face the death penalty for. It has been 3 days since the violence, and emotions in this tight-knit community are still raw. Some, including the Pittsburgh mayor, Bill Peduto, fear that a visit from the president is just too soon.
The last thing I want to see is while these families are burying those that they lost, that there are protests and streets being closed and other things that are taking away from the most important thing that we can do, which is honoring the dead.
Look, the rabbi of the synagogue here, the Tree of Life, says the president is always welcome. But the rabbi of one left-leaning Jewish group says he wants the president to stay away until Mr. Trump denounces white nationalism. Today, the funerals begin. Among the first to be buried, Dr. Jerry Rabinowitz and David and Cecil Rosenthal. They were brothers.
Trump's critics in both parties have blamed the president's rhetoric for the spate of violence, and many in Washington are calling on politicians from both parties to lower the heat. Sarah Sanders held the first White House press briefing in weeks on Monday. Jim Acosta of CNN took issue with the president in the wake of the synagogue shooting and the MAGA bomber, again calling the press the enemy of the people.
Shouldn't you reserve the term enemy for people who are actually the enemy of the United States rather than journalists?
The president's not referencing all media. He's talking about the growing amount of fake news that exists in the country, and the president's calling that out.
May I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
May I ask a follow-up, please? May I ask a follow-up, please? Since you mentioned that, the president said this morning the fake news media, the true enemy of the people, must stop the open and obvious hostility and report the news accurately and fairly. Can you state for the record which outlets that you and the president regard as the enemy of the people?
I'm not going to walk through a list, but I think those individuals probably know who they are.
Would that include my outlet, which received
I don't think it's necessarily specific to a general, broad generalization of a full outlet. At times, I think there's individuals that the president would be referencing. Jordan.
So you're not going to state for the record then. I mean, if the president is going to say the fake news media are the enemy of the people, and if you're going to stand there and continue to say that there are some journalists, some news outlets in this country that meet that characterization, shouldn't you have the guts, Sarah, state which outlets, which journalists are the enemy of the people?
Well, I think it's irresponsible of a news organization like yours to blame responsibility of a pipe bomb that was not sent by the president. Not just blame the president, but blame members of his administration for those heinous acts.
The Trump administration has announced it is sending at least 5,200 active duty troops to the border this week in what officials defended as a necessary response to a roughly 3,500 person refugee caravan still weeks from reaching the United States. Trump, during an interview with Axios, said he'll sign an executive order to end birthright citizenship for babies born on U.S. soil to non-citizens and undocumented immigrants. Any such action would challenge U.S. law, the Constitution, and wind up in court.
On immigration, some legal scholars believe you can get rid of birthright citizenship without changing the Constitution.
With an executive order.
Exactly.
Right.
Have you thought about that?
Yes.
Tell me more.
It was always told to me that you needed a constitutional amendment.
Right.
Guess
14th
what?
Amendment.
You don't.
You don't.
Number one, you don't need that. Number two,
I mean, that's in dispute.
You could definitely
that's very much in dispute.
Well, you can definitely do it with an act of Congress, but now they're saying I can do it just with an executive order. Now, how ridiculous. We're the only country in the world where a person comes in, has a baby, and the baby is essentially a citizen of the United States for 85 years with all of those benefits. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And it has to end.
Have you talked about that with council?
Yeah, I have.
So where in the process?
It's in the process. It'll happen with an executive order. That's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah,
that's
it's
a very
exactly what I'm
interesting.
talking about.
I didn't think anybody knew that but me. I thought I was the only one.
In an interview with Laura Ingraham of Fox, Trump also said he planned to put people from the caravan who apply for asylum into new tent cities that would be all over the place.
What if they're applying for asylum? Isn't the law because Congress didn't
If they
change
apply
the law?
for asylum, we're going to hold them until such time as their trial takes place.
Where? Do we have the facilities?
We're going to build tent cities. We're going to put tents up all over the place. We're not going to build structures and spend all of this, hundreds of millions of dollars. We're going to have tents. They're going to be very nice.
And that's a bit of what's news for now. I'm Nicole Sandler. If you appreciate these reports and the Nicole Sandler Show, I hope you'll consider making a contribution. My work is 100% listener supported, and I can't do it without your help. Find out more at NicoleSandler.com/donate.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 minutes. Bowing to increased political pressure after defeats in weekend elections, Angela Merkel said Monday she intends to step down as German Chancellor when her term ends in 2021. Merkel has seen it all since she took over as Chancellor in 2005, managing relationships with 3 U.S. presidents, responding to numerous EU crises, and strengthening Germany's economic and political influence all the while.
If you want to phone Europe, if you want to talk to somebody who makes all the decisions in Europe, she is the one.
Matthew Kvortrup teaches political science at Coventry University and authored the 2016 book Angela Merkel, Europe's Most Influential Leader. Kvortrup credits Merkel, a fluent Russian speaker, for countering Russia in recent years without raising military tensions.
She's the one who stopped Vladimir Putin in his tracks. Previously, it would have been France or Britain, countries with weapons and armies and so on. She goes there and she showed Vladimir Putin that ultimate economic power is stronger than nuclear weapons and tanks. That will be one of her legacies.
Georgetown University's Eric Langenbacher, author of The Merkel Republic, an appraisal, credits Merkel's patience for her success.
She lets other people make mistakes. She waits until they show their hand, and then she pounces and makes policy.
But she broke from that strategy of leading from behind by admitting more than 1 million refugees in recent years. That move was backed by German industry, which faces a major labor shortage, but lost her support from immigration hardliners who have since made election gains. Merkel remains popular, but her brand of practical coalition governance looks increasingly passé.
A lot of her internal party critics criticize her for veering away from an ideological profile. Maybe one of the reasons why she's losing power now is that she doesn't have that kind of ideological vision that so many people seem to be craving in this day and age.
Luke Vargas, The United Nations.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States, where it is currently 44 degrees Fahrenheit, and we are supposed to get a little bit warmer today. We're going to get a high of 63. So a little bit warmer. We usually are warm here, and we dropped into the upper 50s, low 60s, and we were just around 60 degrees yesterday. So I don't know, it might be 60 degrees today, and it might be 63. Just give it a little bit of a range there. We are continuing to have our overnight lows in the mid to low 40s. Tomorrow we expect a high of low to mid 60s. Probably more on the low end. Mostly cloudy right now. Winds are about 1 mile per hour out of the west-southwest, which is light and variable. And they will remain so, well, through at least tomorrow and tomorrow night. Tonight, we are getting an increasing chance of rain. And then tomorrow, Halloween, we expect a bit of rain during the day, increasing to showers at night, and that may keep, at least in our little hamlet, village, the kids will probably go to a more centralized, dry location, and maybe that'll be better for them. I expect to have some knock on my door anyway. Ragweed pollen, once again, is the dominant pollen, and that is rated as low right now. Air quality index is at 19 parts per million, and that is rated as good. And the daytime UV index, and I think it's because it's the angle of the sun and also the clouds. This is the first time I've seen this since they began measuring, and it is in the low range, and that is at 2. But I will still take care. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.3 inches. Visibility is down to 7 miles, and there's a forecast for it to even go down to 4 miles. And the relative humidity is pretty high at 81%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. London is 48 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 52 and cloudy. Rome is 63 and partly cloudy, with a heavy rain advisory in which they could have floods. And that is, according to the advisory, could disrupt infrastructure, not just the electrical grid. Wow, that's a lot of rain. Kiev is 57 and cloudy. Kabul is 63 and mostly cloudy. Hong Kong, 73 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 61 and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia, though, is 66 degrees and clear. San Francisco, California is 52 degrees and also clear. But New York is not so chilly, 47 degrees Fahrenheit, because you have sunny sun. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Matthew Chapman of Alternet brings us this offering here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Now, Patrick Stein was convicted of a conspiracy to kill Muslims, and his lawyers argue that he shouldn't get a life sentence because Trump riled him up. On Monday, lawyers representing Patrick Stein, a supporter of Donald Trump, who conspired in an anti-Muslim terror plot, are urging a federal judge not to sentence him too harshly, arguing that he only did what he did because he was agitated by the rhetoric of Trump and his supporters on the far right. Now, according to Sarah Sanders, you can't blame Trump for what crazy people do. Patrick Stein was one of 3 right-wing militiamen found guilty in April of a conspiracy to kill Muslim refugees living in rural Kansas. Ahead of the 2016 election, Stein and 2 others plotted with an FBI informant and an undercover agent to bomb an apartment complex that housed Muslims in Garden City. Stein went by the handle Orkin Man and referred to Muslims as cockroaches that he wanted to exterminate. Oh. Yeah. At trial, defense attorneys referred to the defendants as knuckleheads who were engaged in locker room talk. And Stein's attorneys argued his client was a victim of a chaos news environment that had him thinking a civil war was coming. Well, that's exactly what they're trying to get you to think. All right. Well, according to Stein's attorneys, it would be overly harsh to give him a life sentence because 2016 was lit. His lawyer speaking, by the way. And the election was full of hate, driven by the rhetorical China shop bull, who is now our president. They also argued that Stein's knowledge of the Quran came directly from the internet and conservative talk show hosts such as Sean Hannity and Michael Savage, who I know as Michael Weiner. Talk about public harassment. I used to harass that guy right across the street in Market Street sometimes. I'd see him. And he recognized me, and he wouldn't, stick around. Not that I would ever hurt him, but he never wanted to be exposed for who he is. So his lawyer said their client should have known better. They suggested an appropriate sentence for his weapons of mass destruction and conspiracy charges would be, how about 15 years? It remains to be seen whether the court will buy this as a valid argument for leniency, but the idea that far-right rhetoric is spurring hatred and violence is hard to ignore. I would say that instead of giving him less of a sentence, they should give him more. If you're ill-equipped to be able to discern fact, reality, then maybe you need a little bit of help. As the midterm elections approach, Trump has been relying particularly on culture war rhetoric to inflame his supporters, even going so far as to send troops to the border to block potential migrants who are just about 1,000 miles away. Yeah, maybe they're microscopic. Millions of microscopic caravan Latin Americans carrying pestilence and disease. And as Trump does so, the undercurrent of national tension and hostility shows no signs of abating, exactly how they want it leading up to the midterms. Do you want safety and security, or do you want the chaos that Trump's going to bring? I think the message is clear.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
Swaha Patanayak from Reuters brings us this final offering here at the Chef's Table of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Dateline London. Angela Merkel has called time on her own tenure. The politician who's been Germany's chancellor for 13 years has decided not to seek re-election as chairwoman of her party, the Christian Democrats, or the CDU, while she nevertheless wants to serve her full term as chancellor until 2021. Her country and the rest of Europe will inevitably start looking ahead to what could be a more polarizing era. The announcement of Merkel's decision to give up the CDU chair came yesterday, a day after a regional election in the western state of Hesse saw support for the conservative slump by 11 percentage points. Nor was that an aberration. The Christian Democrat sister party, the CSU, 2 weeks ago suffered its worst result in Bavaria since 1950. Some traditional supporters of the two parties were angered by Merkel's 2015 decision to welcome 1 million mainly Muslim asylum seekers. The need to win back such voters may tempt the next chair of the CDU to push the party to the right. And that's how the referees were played, folks. And it's working in Europe. And are we going to let it work here anymore? It's going to be hard to square with the demands of Merkel's junior coalition party, the left-leaning Social Democrats, or the SPD, who are also being punished by voters. The SPD's share of the Hesse vote fell to roughly a fifth, the worst result in the state since 1946. And the party is under pressure to show supporters it is achieving tangible results by staying in the government. Now, there will also be consequences for the rest of Europe if the CDU lists to the right, A lame duck Merkel or her successor may be less tolerant of countries such as Italy, who flout the EU's budget rules, all the more so if the CDU is trying to win back its traditional supporters, who typically favor fiscal discipline. Merkel may be remembered for her ability to forge consensus and act for the greater good. Domestic political pressure means her successor is unlikely to have that luxury. Not such great news to leave you with. I'm sorry, folks, but maybe we'll pick it up tomorrow. And we will, because we'll visit with you tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Do stay tuned to Netroots Radio as it broadcasts on all day and all night with all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will visit with you tomorrow right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pas fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.